Will Dable, Daniel, or Drake save the Giants? Kyler's Cards and Aaron's way wrong timeline for the Jets. Jets. We got all that and more. I'm Jason Fitz. It's time for Inside Coverage. By now, you know the deal. She's Jori Epstein. He's Charles Robinson. I'm Jason Fitz. And it is time for us to hang out, go through everything you need to know across the NFL with a little inside coverage. Ladies and gentlemen, it's always fun that we get to hang out together. I'm particularly excited tonight because we got a lot to get into as we take a look around the league. I want to start selfishly because I just watched the Giants. I don't know if you know this, but like there was a Raiders game that happened. The Giants were on the other side of it, but I digress. It's now that you mentioned it, Jori, I mean, the Raiders might have won by a little bit, which I think is probably a statement to how bad the Giants are, if we're going to be honest here. And I also think, frankly, no matter what was happening with the Giants, the minute you saw Daniel Jones go down with what we now know is an ACL injury, it sort of had to set the panic button in for everybody because there were Giants fans that were still trying to find a little bit of hope. I think all that hope is now gone. So, Jori, I know you were with the Giants today at practice. I'm trying to get a sense of what the Giants are trying to accomplish for the rest of the season right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, firstly, on your Raiders, it was funny. I reached out to someone, one of my sources there, I guess it was yesterday, at this point, Tuesday. And I was like, hey, like, blah, blah. Hopefully vibes are a little bit better this week than last for y'all. And the source goes, thanks. Yes, they are better, not to be confused with good. And I just I was like, wise distinction. Good to know. So that's your Las Vegas update. But yeah, the Giants, I mean, look, this is a team that overperformed last year and I think made some key roster decisions accordingly. And that's a problem because what happened last year wasn't realistic relative to where the roster was. It wasn't realistic relative to what they need to do going forward. And they signed Daniel Jones to his contract. I mean, I think that his agent did well by him getting him this guaranteed money now that he's got the injury. And the Giants did well because they basically just committed to him for 2 years. Like the last 2 years, there's an easy out beforehand. He doesn't have guaranteed salary after 2 years. So now you have the Giants brass spotted over the weekend, scouting out at big college games, the quarterbacks, and you have Tommy DeVito starting. And you can say, well, does Matt Barkley give the Giants a better chance to win? Yeah, maybe right now, but they might as well see what they have in Tommy DeVito leading up to the draft class. So I think they're kind of like, okay, let's see what we have in the building. And we know that this is about the draft at this point.
It seems to me, given where their draft pick is likely to be, I just don't see a scenario, and I could be completely wrong here. I don't see a scenario where they can draft one of these heavy hitting, like let's say it's a Drake, whoever, let's say it's the second quarterback. Let's say they don't finish with the worst record or whatever, and they end up drafting the second quarterback off the board. Really? Like, is it, you'd basically be saying to Daniel Jones, you're going to have an Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes year here. You're going to play for a year. Hopefully you'll play well enough that you can be moved for some draft assets to a team of your choice. But it just, I know they're kicking tires, but I mean, do they really have, I guess, the nerve to go out and draft a Caleb Williams or a Drake May or whoever the third quarterback ends up being, and then go through this year of, I mean, in that market, I don't know how it could be processed as anything other than dysfunction. And by the way, you're also using a top asset that won't contribute in 2024. So you're taking a piece off the field that could potentially help the team. That injury, to me, it was, I thought, the worst case scenario for the Giants. I thought, the second I saw it, I thought, well, now you're definitely locked into them. And I know how the contract was structured, but it seemed more realistic to me if they were to fall apart this season, you just eat it and you draft Caleb Williams or Drake May and then, start fresh next year. But of all the markets, I would not want to take a Caleb Williams or a Drake May and then sit them on the bench. New York is in the top two.
I think that we have to have a little context to what was happening when they gave Daniel Jones his contract, because you mentioned the draft. I want to go back to last year. I pulled it up here. They were picking 25th in the draft last year. So we have to remember that, yes, Will Levis has had 10 good days for the Titans. So, maybe he deserves this whole parade and everybody missed on Will Levis. But realistically, where the Giants were picking, they had to know that the chances that they were going to get a quarterback that could actually help them were minimal, right? So then that really forces your hand. When you look at the free agent quarterback market that was available last year, it wasn't good. And so then you look at the fact that you're combining the issue of not having another quarterback on the open market with the fact that they were drafting so low in the first round because they were better than their record. I don't know, even if we try revisionist history, I don't know if that makes it a bad move what they did with Daniel Jones, because you had to have somebody. So you lock yourself in for 2 years, you have somebody, and C-Rob, at least that gives you something you can move off of moving forward, in my mind.
Maybe. I mean, it depends. I mean, I don't think with what you paid him, by the way, what another team would be on the hook for, I don't know that he's an attractive trade option. I mean, if he goes out and he plays exponentially well, if he does something to convince a team that, hey, maybe this can be like a Jared Goff type of situation where we acquire this guy and his second life in our franchise helps us. And beyond that, let's see. I mean, maybe there's someone in that organization that ends up elsewhere following the 2024 season, right? So, I mean, it's like when Brad Holmes ends up in Detroit, that helps to pave the way to get Jared Goff into Detroit, opens up a trade lane that could feasibly happen following the 2024 season. I just think the amount of money he's being paid, and I get what the option was, but even though the contract is structured to be a 2-year, I think they just paid the guy a ton of money for really what was one season. I mean, basically one season of hope that Brian Daboll was going to be able to turn him in the right direction and make him worth that money. I still think that contract makes him virtually untradeable unless he can. Just nobody out there. It's like Kyler. When Kyler signed that deal, even if Kyler plays well the rest of the season. Even if he does
4 hours of homework.
Yeah, that's right. Even if he does his homework, it's 4 hours of homework per week or maybe per season. I don't know exactly what the clause said. You're still staring at the money and you're going, do we really want to commit that kind of money to a guy who's already had injuries, already had a significant injury, and really more than one significant injury? He's had a shoulder, he's had a knee. The size has come into play with him.
Neck.
And then we get into neck. Then we get into that, is he the leader? Does he have the right demeanor for your team and all these things? And then you get to the money. And you're like, there's just a laundry list of stuff. Maybe Daniel Jones doesn't have that much piled onto him, but like you said, Fitz, I get it. I know what the scenario was at that point. I think you could have went and gotten a bridge starter. Go get Gardner Minshew for a year. And just say we're going to do a classic bridge situation and figure out our quarterback a year from now, rather than doing what they ultimately did.
But I think that what you're saying, C-Rob, about why they extended him this belief that Brian Daboll's the quarterback whisperer, the same thing he could do with Josh Allen, he did with Daniel Jones, or he could do with Daniel Jones. That was their hope. And that's what they do after last year. I think that might be the same case why now Joe Schoen and his front office are at these big college games, because they think that that is what Brian Daboll has to offer. It's not just like, this gritty mentality. I mean, quite frankly, the gritty mentality that won them games last year isn't really working this year. And I know you touched on this in your Belichick column that we'll get to about the Patriot Way, but you had Xavier McKinney saying in the Giants locker room this week that the leaders on the team are not being listened to, and Dabes had to talk to him afterward. And so I think that now the number one thing, not the only thing, but the number one thing that Brian Daboll can do to show them that he is the right head coach for the next long-term or medium-term foreseeable future is develop a quarterback. And why would you then pass on a quarterback in this year's draft class when you have that kind of long-term rookie contract compensation and the coach who apparently can get it out of him?
Well, and I mean, Jori, personnel people are going to side with, they're going to say these, especially the top two, they're going to say you don't pass on these two. If you have any kind of a question, just fine. If it's going to be a mess for a year, who cares? Deal with it. These two guys are worth that. So people will side with you. I guess to me, in my mind, I sit there and think about how it went in Kansas City, where they're getting asked, during Mahomes' rookie year, you're hearing all these great things he's doing in practice. And you're like, you can get a look at this guy. He's going to play. Really, you're going to set him the whole year. Whereas New York, I don't know. It's just not a market where I would want to have to put either the rookie or Daniel Jones through that kind of a scenario where every single week you're going to have the jabby microphones in your face going, what are we going to do this?
It's also, C-Rob, a much different coaching situation than it looked like 12 months ago because Dabo was being just anointed, walk on water. Like there was just this level of, holy, you know what, we got our guy. As we sit right now, the Giants would have the 4th pick, according to Tankathon, in the NFL draft this year. Really, in some ways, the 3rd pick because Chicago has 2nd and 3rd, right? So if they're looking for a quarterback, they would have a very reasonable shot at having the 3rd best quarterback in this draft. But you're now putting the 3rd best quarterback in this draft in a market where they've got to deal with all of this pressure with Daniel Jones, with Brian Daboll, who has gone from being wonder child to suddenly question. Like Frank Schwab, every Sunday night, I feel like Frank is sitting here saying, look, Daboll looks like a one-year wonder. And I understand where he's coming from on that. I mean, frankly, the results have not been what anybody expected at this point, C-Rob.
Well, the quarterback's different. You know, I'm sorry, but Josh Allen does have a different skill set than Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones' track record was the opposite of Josh Allen's, I would argue. Josh Allen every single year got better. Yeah. Daniel Jones every single year seemed to get a little worse. And so just 2 completely different trajectories, 2 different skill sets. I think maybe even 2 different mentalities as players and leaders, even things that they do on the field. I mean, and you could say part of that is Josh's problem because he goes out there and plays, hero ball. Whereas I don't think Daniel Jones has had a track record of being that kind of guy that's just like, screw it, I'm going to take this game over. I'll ask you 2 this, though, because I think this is a realistic scenario that could play out. As you said, the Bears are holding 2 picks that could be in the top 3. Arizona could end up with the number 1 overall pick. Maybe they stick with Kyler. We don't know yet what's going to happen with the Bears and Justin Fields. It feels like there is going to be a trade scenario in play for one of those 2 quarterbacks. Maybe not both. Maybe it won't be a situation where 1, 2, and 3 will be Cardinals sticking with Kyler Murray, Bears sticking with Justin Fields, and now they're both sitting there going, we're auctioning off these picks to the teams that need a core. But I do see one of those potentially being one of those 2 quarterbacks, probably the 2nd quarterback, being a trade commodity for whoever holds that, whether it's either the Bears or the Cardinals. If you're the Giants, you're going to be one of these teams that's potentially in the top 10. And I think the top 10 is going to be thick with teams that really need a quarterback. Do you deal assets too? Do you go, okay, not only are we going to sit the guy for a year behind Daniel Jones, but we're actually going to go and get the guy because we know he's not going to be at the 4th pick. We know he's not going to be, if you end up somewhere between, let's say, like 4 and 7, and you're in the Raiders situation last year where they're at 7, they're like, we like one guy. We can't get that guy, so we're going to go ahead and pass on going and getting a quarterback, and maybe that's part of what blew up that situation there as well. If you're the Giants, I'm asking you to this, would you not only sit him for the year, go get the rookie quarterback, but you also trade, like put assets into moving up and getting that quarterback because it will be expensive?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I would say. I moved to New York in April, as you guys know. I don't think the New York media market is as bad as people make it out to be. And I also think that Daniel Jones is immensely equipped to handle this. Like I was loving this today. So he was asked today about when he got hurt. First of all, the fact that he talked today, I was like, this guy did not have to talk today. You don't have to talk after you get hurt and you're out for the season. Then he was asked multiple times if there's anything more than an ACL. And he's like, yeah, it's my ACL, but wouldn't say whether it was more or not, which I think it is. That's another conversation because he would never say, no, there's nothing more. We asked him about his future. He was like, I'm really focused on the now. I'm focused on the rehab. I was like, did you talk to Daves? Did Daves tell you that they're committed to you for the future? Daves and I talked about the injury. We really talked about keeping a positive attitude. Nothing could faze this guy of the questions that were asked. So I think if you have a rookie quarterback who you feel like is equipped right, and you have Daniel Jones who's equipped right, then I also think, and I don't like this part, but in today's like anti-media environment where they think that we're always out to get them, I think the locker room would view this more as an us issue than a them issue. Maybe that's naive of me. You think it's naive of me?
No, I
was laughing, but yeah.
I just want to push Jori back into the Joe Judge era, and then she can make the decision about how rough that media market can be. I think it doesn't feel as rough with Daboll because Daboll's had some success, but I'm going to tell you, if he replicates,
okay, but that locker room has not had success, and it was still like both reporters and players. I mean, I was surprised how smooth everything went today.
They had success last year. I'm talking about stack up a couple of seasons and watch how bad it gets. You know,
but do you think it's going to get that bad by next year? I think if anything, drafting that quarterback can ignite the locker room. It can show guys like, hey, we're building something. With all due respect to Daniel Jones, who seems like a very good guy. And like, I also think that a lot of the challenges he had were much more reflective of the team around him than his play, particularly this year. They gave him no chance to succeed. But I think also, given that he hasn't had that track record of success in the last, 5 years, I think that a team would be like motivated by getting a quarterback like that. I can't talk today.
I'm somewhere in the middle on whether or not the locker room can handle it and New York can handle it. But I'll say this, C-Rob. If I had a shot as a GM at Drake May or Caleb Williams, I don't care what the asking price is. I'll pay it. Yeah. Because frankly, if you nail it with your quarterback, we all know this, in today's world, the way quarterbacks can play, you've got a solution for the next 15 years for your franchise. And realistically, there were substantial question marks that we forget now about Bryce Young. Some people had question marks about CJ Stroud. They're trying to create question marks at this point about Caleb Williams and Drake May, but there aren't. Like, Caleb Williams and Drake May are about as clean a quarterback prospect as you see. And every once in a while, you get a clean one that comes through. There were some questions about Joe Burrow, but he was mostly clean. There was questions about Trevor Lawrence. It was mostly clean. Like, when you looked overall, 95% of the feedback was, yeah, this guy's going to be the guy. 95% of the feedback around Drake May and Caleb Williams leans to that direction also. I would go all in. It doesn't matter if it means I'm leveraging future drafts. It doesn't matter if I'm screwing up my team for the future. If I've got a shot at one of those two guys, I will do whatever it takes to get there. And frankly, if Arizona or Chicago were to sit where they are, keep Kyler Murray or Justin Fields respectively, and take that trade, that's the stupidest thing either of those franchises could do.
I think if your conviction is there, I agree with you. Like, I think if your personnel department looks at these two and says, okay, these are different. This isn't like a normal situation with quarterbacks. This is a rare, we actually have two guys that are worth selling out for. And by the way, to put this into perspective, all these quarterbacks that have been drafted in recent years would have gone behind these two guys. Bryce Young would have gone behind these two guys. CJ Stroud would have gone behind these two guys. You get to Trevor Lawrence and there would be like an argument. Like, I'm sure, I think Trevor probably is, it would have been a heated debate about where does Trevor Lawrence fit with these three guys? Where did he fit coming out of Clemson? Because he was very much perceived as being a perfect player. But you talk to teams and they'll skip over Trevor and they'll go back to Andrew Luck and say, in terms of like the tools and the size and what he can do on the field, he's very similar to Drake May in terms of just the specialness of the player. You go back to Andrew Luck and you compare him to Caleb Williams. So it's
weird,
wild.
Like supply and demand. Like, again, I'll go back. I've got Tankathon up in front of me. Arizona, I think, still needs a quarterback. We'll see what ends up. Justin Fields, we'll see. That's fine. So even if you take them out of the equation, after that, you have the Giants. Yep, they need one. Got the Patriots. Yep, they need one. The Rams. Yep, they're going to need one. You got the Packers. Yep, they need one. Then you got Tampa Bay. Yep, they need one. Then you got Denver. Yep, they need one. That's your next 6 picks. If Will Levis turns out to be a golden god and Tennessee doesn't, after that is Atlanta and Washington. So 8 of the next 9 teams would, I mean, if I'm sitting here selling a house, this is like, I got the one house in the middle of the street and I got 20 bidders coming up with cash offers. Like, this thing is going to take a king's ransom, and I would still do it. I would still do it for either of these two guys.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's wild to me how we're like, there's so many great quarterbacks coming into the league, and geez, we're going to run out of quarterback need. And then we get in November and we're like, dude, a third to half of the teams in the league still need a quarterback every year. How is this possible?
Yeah.
Jori, did you get any chance to talk to DeVito out there? I feel like the entire trajectory for DeVito has been really funny to me, just because it's come from out of nowhere. Like, there was never a chance that anyone expected this. And week 1, it was like, oh, this is a cute story. But then all of a sudden you realize what's not cute is that Tommy DeVito is a starting quarterback in the NFL.
Okay, so the Giants locker room, to paint the picture for y'all, there are all these wooden lockers lining the walls, which is pretty normal. That's how it was when I was in Dallas too. And then they don't have enough room for all of the practice squads. They have these sort of like pop-up makeshift lockers in the middle of the locker room, in between the ping pong table and the foosball table and the couches. And that's where the practice squad guys go. That's where Tommy DeVito is. That's where he's staying. And that's where he did his interview. And someone's like, are you going to get a real locker now? He's like, no, I'm sticking to my roots, man. And I'm like, you go, Tommy.
It's like, this is the Kirk Cousins minivan, right? I mean, that's like, yeah. You know. Like,
oh, I mean, this guy also grew up like in New Jersey. He's living at home right now. His mom is doing his laundry.
That is so weird.
He was like, I think my town, he's like, everyone in my town's really excited. I went to get pizza last night and people were congratulating me. I think it's like 1 mile long, my town. I Googled it. It said it was 4.5 square miles. So I don't think he was like so far off. I mean, this guy's literally like living in his small town, New Jersey, and he's about to start an NFL game, who, by the way, he's starting against a team that beat the Giants 40-0 when they had Daniel Jones. So I don't know how fun it's going to be next week. I don't know how great his body's going to be feeling on Monday after he sees Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and that crew. But we did talk to him. And I mean, look, to his credit, all he can do is work. He was in the building on Tuesday during the day off, going over film with the quarterback's coach and the offensive coordinator and head coach. He's like, I actually got to like throw balls to Darius Slayton and Jalen Hyatt today. Like, not just like a figure it out and hope they know what I'm thinking in the middle of the game situation. So he'll have more preparation, but he did say, like, if you had told him before the season that he was going to be named the starter, because that's the thing. It's not just that he's like, oh, all of a sudden starter. Like, he is knowing 5 days in advance, he was named the starter. And he was like, I would have been shocked, and said that something really bad probably had to happen.
With that in mind, I know we've got a lot to move on to, but Josh Dobbs, like for me, and C-Rob, you've been around this league forever. I mean, was it as awe-inspiring to you as it was to most of us that were sitting here watching him take his first snaps on the sideline so people can figure out what his snap count cadence was? Like, I'm still just baffled that Josh Dobbs changes teams and does that.
This just doesn't happen. Like, not something. So Dobbs, what was really interesting about this, and I don't think this has been reported at all. You know, I had a chance to talk to some people, and so when Dobbs found out that Arizona was going to start Clayton Tune, he's like, oh, what's going on? Like, what just happened? Like, he's completely, I think it kind of blindsided him a little bit. Like, I think he was stunned, and people around Dobbs were like, dude, you're going to get traded. Like, like it's coming. And like, Dobbs had no clue. He was just like, really? You really think I'm going to get traded? And then, next thing you know, he turns around and he gets dealt. But to have that happen where you're going in and you like literally not knowing the names of everybody that you're with, like not being there long enough to be able to look at a guy, every single guy that you're in the huddle with, and go, yeah, I know exactly what you're doing. I know your name. Like he's operating with less than 10% realistically of the playbook. It was just as basic of football as you can get in terms of just asking a guy to walk into your building, a couple of days later, walk into a huddle and actually lead a team the way that he did. And I will say this about Dobbs, low key, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, because everybody knows the book on him. Remarkably smart guy, right? Absolutely brilliant dude. Comes out of Tennessee.
Aerospace engineering undergrad.
Yeah. He's a rocket scientist.
Yeah, basically 4.0 rocket scientist coming out of
interned
University
with NASA in the off season.
Yeah, like he's and everybody loves him. Like everywhere he's ever been, everybody's loved Josh Dobbs. Like the quintessential, I had a GM who has crossed paths with him over the years tell me, like, you pray you get a 15-year backup like this guy, because he's so good at helping a starter prepare. He's great in that room. He's like, and really you want him to be able to ascend to be a starter. But if he can't be, you want to hang on to this guy for like 15 years because he can help you in a pinch and he does all these other jobs that backups do really well. Now he's in a Kyle Shanahan offense, right? So he's a candidate for one of these Kyle Shanahan teams that have Kyle Shanahan offenses that are going to need a quarterback. Green Bay runs an iteration of a Kyle Shanahan offense. The Rams run an iteration of a Kyle Shanahan offense. The San Francisco 49ers obviously run a Kyle Shanahan offense. So, those are three teams where mean, we'll see what's going to happen with Stafford's health. We'll see if Brock Purdy can play to keep his job, which, oh, by the way, the rest of the season is going to be really important for Brock Purdy. He can get into that doghouse very fast and not be the quarterback in 2024. And then, in Green Bay, like, who knows what's going to happen ultimately with Jordan Love. And by the way, he's in Minnesota. Like, he can still prove that he potentially could be more than a bridge starter for them. I think he's 30.
No, you're saying age-wise?
Yeah, I think he's 30. I think he's 30 years old.
28.
So it's not like,
28.
Is he 28? God, I thought he was 30. Holy cow. So, okay, 28. He's got a lot of football left in him. So I think if he can convince Kevin O'Connell that I'm the guy, he could stick.
Is there a nerdier quarterback room anywhere in the NFL? Give me Josh Dobbs hanging out with Kirk Cousins. Like, it is the like, whatever we think of quarterbacks hanging out, those, I'm just saying. I love
but
that
also
answer.
Josh Dobbs, like, going back to his hero, I was saying about everyone loving him. Like, if you watch his post-game press conference, he's got like his sweater with his collar like coming out over, and he's like, Josh Dobbs, by way of introduction, nice to meet you all, happy to be here. Like, introducing himself. It was adorable.
Yeah, look, I'm flat out rooting for this kid to suddenly have the opportunity to start somewhere for a few years and live his dream.
They liked him in Arizona. Like, they were really happy with him. Like, he made them competitive. And again, people think, well, he got benched for Tune. He didn't really get benched for Tune. They were dealing him. They knew they were going to deal him. They knew that they were going to end up starting Tune between the period of time where they would deal Dobbs and ultimately get to Kyler. They knew it was all going to happen. So I wouldn't discount either that Arizona had a really good experience with him. He went out there and he gave them an ability to be competitive and not look like a team that was tanking into the record that they ultimately have. Now, granted, not a lot of wins, of course, one win, but it wasn't a situation where they just went out and got slaughtered every single game. They were a tough team to play offensively with him at quarterback. So.
And the other thing I find really interesting about Josh Dobbs is he was doing everything he was doing with the Arizona roster that we all knew was not ready to compete, and we all knew was not like a contending roster in this league. He's got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. Wow, there's a lot of sons there, but he's got the players now. And so how much, like, if you take what he has been able to do in those situations, and he used the Mike Tomlin quote of like, no one cares what your circumstances are. Like, they just wanted to see what you go do. He also has better circumstances now. And so I'm actually working on a story that's going to come out on Yahoo later this week, where it's just about like, how hard is it to do what he did and why was he able to do that? So like, I talked to Matt Barkley today about a time he kind of like got thrust into action without much prep. I talked to an offensive lineman about like, when you're figuring out the cadence, like what else do you need to do when you have a quarterback in there all of a sudden? Talked to an offensive coordinator who had played a quarterback with, I think it was like 5 days in the building, and how you go about that crash course. And so I just think the whole process is fascinating in terms of what he did. And he's even saying, Josh Dobbs is saying in his press conference, as that he would basically call out the play to the team, and then in the headset, Kevin O'Connell would translate what he just said, because he didn't know what it meant. He understood the concepts. And the other thing that I think helps him a lot is that this is not someone who's been sitting on the bench all year and all of a sudden is asked to be fresh. Like, he does have that muscle memory, like flex of diagnosing defenses for the first 8 or so weeks of the season. He's just doing it in a different language now. And so I think that actually all sets him up really well for success.
All right, so the place he left is Arizona. The Cardinals now make Kyler Murray the starter for the Falcons. What I'm trying to figure out is what that means. Like, I honestly don't even, I'm not smart enough, C-Rob, to look at this and understand what it should mean, what it does mean. Like, Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, is there a real relationship there, or are they just sort of dating casually?
No, I think
dating casually isn't a real relationship.
No, casually dating. Like, they're seeing each other, but they're both sort of interested in seeing other people. So they're just like, hey, we'll go out for some dates because this is better than being alone on Thanksgiving. But like, I don't really want to commit in. I don't want to meet your parents. I don't want to know your friends' first names. I just kind of want to like go out a few times and have some drinks, and we'll enjoy the company. But we're both still looking for a right, actual long-term thing. It just doesn't happen to be here. I mean, that was clear to me, Jori. What says a lot about my. Go ahead, C-Rob. Go ahead.
You were completely right. I just wanted to give you a hard time, and you totally went into that hole.
Perfect. That's what I do.
A little window into something there.
Darkness.
I will say this: they told the truth in training camp. Like, when I went there and I I remember him
Unlike
sitting.
the Raiders. Who did not tell the truth.
Exactly. Right. Well, Josh, I'll just pin that on Josh McDaniels. We'll get to that later. But I remember I was sitting on like a golf cart with Jonathan Gannon. And I'm asking him about Kyler, and he was like forceful about, no, we're going to play with this guy. He is going to play this season. I've already told people in the locker room that, like, you better be on board with this guy. And if you're not, get out. Like, you're not going to be here because this is our guy. As soon as he's healthy, we're putting him back on the field. And I remember at the time I was like, is this like overly strong? Does he really mean this? Because all the signs then were, okay, new regime. It's going to be a different situation. Kyler's probably on his way out. Let's see if he even comes back to play with this injury, coming back from this injury. And then I remember when I talked to Monty Ossenfort, the general manager, Monty was more like, we're going to measure, like, we want to get him on the field. We're going to measure and see where this goes. We're going to see how, what this looks like when he's in the classroom now, working with the quarterbacks, what it's like for him to not be out there starting games. How is he in the building? How is he with the players? How is his prep? How is his rehab? So it was like Gannon was doing the coach thing where he's like, that's going to be our guy. We're going to get him on the field. Be ready for it. And then Monty was doing the GM thing where he's like, yeah, sure. We're also going to measure everything between now and then, just like we're doing with the rest of the roster. But I think it was all true. I think that measurement will take place with Monty Ossenfort. I think it'll take place with Jonathan Gannon. But him getting back on the field now, this is 100% real. It's what Gannon had in mind going all the way back to the offseason. He was absolutely adamant about wanting to get a real run and a real look at Kyler Murray. And I don't think Gannon gives a shit what it does to the draft. So, like, if they win 4 or 5 games with Kyler and they finish the season as like a 6-win team and people are like, oh my God, like, look, what did we just do? We blew up our shot at a quarterback. I don't think Gannon gives a shit about that. Like, he just, if he feels like Kyler's a good player and they win games with Kyler, they're like, we're set. We don't got to worry about drafting a quarterback.
Is there a part of financial reset that factors into any of this? Because that's something I always hear, like Mike Tannenbaum, my buddy always sits there and says, hey, but you can reset the contract. You can reset the contract. Like, does that matter?
I don't think it matters for the Cardinals because look at the roster. Like they're blowing it out. They're turning everything over. They're going to have plenty of cap space moving forward. Right. I mean, cap space is not going to be a huge problem for the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler, if Kyler's on the roster, will be making a ton of money. He'll be making a top tier quarterback salary, but the rest of the pieces around him are going to be fairly cheap for the next couple of years. And I also think the build, I don't foresee them going out and doing like splurging in free agency. They were pretty clear that they want this to be a traditional build where they want to stack draft classes, groom guys in their system and in their culture, raise it up from a younger team. So I just don't, if it turns into a spending spree, that's ownership. And that's not really this ownership. Like it just isn't. Yeah, I think that's where they're at.
Kyler's 26. Like y'all, I just Googled
not
it.
Old,
I mean, that's the thing. I think because I've heard his name for so long, I just think of Kyler as being a fixture. But he's
been a thing since high school.
You're right. I mean, I think that has to play into some of this. Like, if you're to your point, C-Rob, you don't have to necessarily go out and get it all built overnight because he's still a young quarterback. Like, Bo Nix is probably, I don't know Bo Nix's age off the top of my head, but he's got to be 24 at this point. He's been playing college football for like 87 years at this point. So, the age shouldn't be an issue either.
And I think people should remember, we get fixated on these down, like the worst times for quarterbacks. And it just automatically people are trying to move a player off a roster. Don't forget, look where the Ravens are right now. Do you remember the depths of like what was going on with Lamar at the end of last season? Do you remember like we were talking?
What was going on still in like April?
Yeah, I mean trade demands. Like why don't they want to give him this contract back at the start, and now they want to give it to him, but it's not getting signed. Like is he faking an injury? Like he's not even fake the injury, but is he dragging his feet and coming back? And that was horrible. And it felt like in that moment, very possible that Baltimore was about to be blown up and start over again. And then it didn't happen. And everybody's looking at Baltimore and feeling great. Talent level is different,
so are
obviously,
you saying
between
you should
Baltimore
get your
and Arizona.
quarterback sufficiently mad at you for it to almost blow up, for them to be demanding trades? And if you do that, the season to follow, you too can be a Super Bowl contender.
I think we shouldn't overlook that the talent that we've seen from Kyler is still there. He is a very, very talented player. There were times, especially under the basically one really hot start under Cliff, where we were like, is this guy going to be the league MVP? We were talking about that mid-season. Now then it fell apart, but the talent's still there. And I think other people recognize it as well. It's just now they got to figure out, is it their long-term piece? And now how do they build around it? But if it is their long-term piece, it's a pretty good feeling to have your quarterback in place and then spend those draft picks that you're going to have on.
The draft picks that you would like, if you end up with the first overall pick in this draft somehow, if Kyler Murray plays well enough, but your team's just not good enough, and you end up with the top 2 pick, you're Arizona, you're going to get a king's ransom if you keep him in. I looked it up. Bo Nix's 23 in fairness, but he will be 24 when he's drafted. So I'm just making the point that you're sometimes you press and reset, but you're not actually getting any younger. Speaking of not getting any younger, the Rams didn't get any younger, but they signed Carson Wentz. Do we care? I mean, Jori, are you sitting there saying, ooh, something big happened here? The Rams signed Wentz.
I'm not saying that something big happened in the sense of now the Rams are about to go make a run for the NFC West. But I just think it's fun when you think about the 2016 quarterback class and taking Jared Goff for the Rams, and the Eagles took Carson Wentz. And then now you just have all these things where Goff went one place and Stafford went one place, and you just have this whole cycle. And I think that part is fun. It is interesting to me, going back to what Sierra was saying about if Josh Dobbs succeeds in a Shanahan type offense, what can that do for him? I do think we've seen Sean McVay be very particular about quarterbacks. And so, to me, if Sean McVay likes him enough to get him in the building, that says something. And if he can succeed with Sean McVay, that says something. So I don't think that they're going to be what?
I got a thought on this. I can tell you what I think it means.
I think that, and I almost had this conversation with Kyler, and then I know we moved on to sort of the locker room element of this, because I was going to ask you guys, if you think even if Kyler's talent is there, does he have what a team needs as a locker room presence? And I know there are guys in the league who like to say he's a baseball player in every sense of the word, both the athleticism and the way he operates relative to individual sports versus team sports. But I think that with Carson Wentz too, it's how much does he have left in the tank? And also there have been locker room issues in multiple places that he has gone to. Is that going to change here?
Yeah. Well, first off, the Rams screwed up they did. And I say that, I know people in the organization, I'm sure they'd be pissed if, they hear me saying this, but Matt Stafford had an elbow issue last year. There was a health concern. And how do you not go out and get a decent backup who you can have ready for when this guy goes down? And honestly, there are people in the organization who wondered that. When this all happened, it was maybe we could have gotten a Gardner Minshew, we could have gotten somebody why are we in this position? And it was because they thought they went and got Stetson Bennett, and they thought Stetson Bennett could be a backup. And obviously that's gone in a terrible direction for them. And so now you're in this situation where you got to roll the dice on Carson Wentz. And what intrigues me is that Wentz has a lot of talent. He does. He absolutely has a ton of talent, but he drives coaches insane because he does not listen when they tell him, don't throw the ball in a situation where you're going to take
the
a
other
sack.
Team.
Yeah, don't do wild. Okay, you just got to just play a calm game. Use your head, get rid of the ball, don't take sacks. It's okay to throw it away. Don't start running around and getting wild and loose and doing just crazy stuff that ends up going wrong at some point, and then it becomes a landslide with him. This is a great coach that he's with, but you know what? Doug Peterson he's a good coach, right? Can we all agree Doug Peterson's a great coach, right? He's won a Super Bowl. He's done well with different quarterbacks, and he drove Doug Peterson nuts. And Sean is similar to Kyle in the respect that when you get into his doghouse and he's pissed at you, it's really hard to get out of there. Carson's got to be careful of this opportunity. I would say figure out how to rein it in and listen and just Like, don't lean into what you think your skill set is. Listen to the coach and play below the radar if you can.
I mean, you mentioned the coach, but I have to at least throw out here, Samuel L. Jackson went to social media on X on Sunday and said, at what point do we start the Rams coaching conversation? So, look, there's some people in the world I wouldn't want to piss off. Samuel L. Jackson's one of them. He apparently does not think McVay deserves this job anymore. So, now all of a sudden there's
weird. I mean, like, no, like whatever. I don't know what Samuel L. Jackson's level of expertise is when it comes to this, but like, if you paid attention to that roster and what happened over the offseason, really? Like, really? We had high expectations. As far as I'm concerned, we came into the season, they're exceeding the expectations of what we thought they could be with all those young players. They went and got Puka Nacua, who, if he can stay healthy, looks like he's going to be a fine replacement someday for Cooper Kupp. They have, they made something out of Tutu Atwell. Like, what are we moaning about with the Rams? Like, we didn't expect great things from the Rams. We felt like it was going to be a rebuild. They want to call it a remodel.
Samuel L. Jackson seemed like the type of person that's interested in a rebuild. C-Rob. Samuel L. Jackson is interested in a Royale with cheese. There's no rebuild in his lexicon. It doesn't exist. Okay, we can move on from Samuel L. Jackson. That's fine. That's fine.
Jori didn't get that reference, by the way. She has no idea what that means.
I haven't pulled up on Google right now.
Okay,
she's never seen Pulp Fiction. There's no clue. She got Royale with cheese completely went over her head.
Well, so you know what, Jori. I'm just
C-Rob's often concerned about my well-being and ability to function in normal society.
I think
but
in the
I'm
off
true to
season,
who I am, for better and for worse.
In the off season, we can all help better each other. All right, like I'm a person that doesn't necessarily read a lot of books. Shocking, I know. Nobody thinks I'm a smart guy in the room. So maybe like every week, you give me a book to read. I'll read it. I'll give you a cultural movie that's significant to watch. You watch it, and then we'll come together for the podcast, and we'll tell each other about our experience with it. That way, we both get better.
Fitz, she left her apartment on Halloween and went outside and was like, "What's going on out here? Like, what's like?" She was all good. I'm like, "Are you serious? Like you didn't?"
I know the date of Halloween, and I did trick or treat growing up, but I didn't know that in New York, outside stores, they just put like massive goblins and skulls. Like, I thought you do that at your home, not at your store.
Yeah, but you're in New York. Like, nobody has a home in New York. So
that's why I thought it just wouldn't happen here.
Jori, there's so much, the off season, we're going to have Stone, producer extraordinaire, during the off season and help us figure out just a life hack segment we'll do every week, and we'll help each other. There's growth in all of this. I'll become smarter. You'll become dumber. And through all of it, it is only going to make America even more amazed.
C-Rob, what are we going to make C-Rob do?
I'm going to sit back and criticize all of it. That's what I'm here for.
You know what? We're going to make C-Rob only say positive things about all of it along the way.
About everything. Every tweet he responds to, he has to say nice things.
Yeah, we're going to do a nice tweet response. So I'll read a tweet that we know he hates.
Get smarter, C-Rob gets nicer.
I mean, look at that.
They're happier.
Well, I love the fact that like what we've really done is we pulled Jori down in all of this. Like, we're trying to make you nice and me dumb. So, but like, she's the one that's just out there like, oh, I just need to learn about movies because he's just smarter and better than we are. Aaron Rodgers smarter and better than everybody, I guess, because he, tears an Achilles and then he misses like 6 days and then he's like, let's go, let's start running. So on Monday Night Football, it was heard he was saying to Derwin James that he'd be back in a few weeks. Now, I want to preface, he's walked that back a little bit in some interviews since then and said, hey, like, there's still a lot of hoops to jump through. He's been pretty honest about it, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, no matter when he comes back, if he actually plays football this season, that has to be a stunning result, right? Like, doesn't matter where we end up in this thing. If he actually steps on a field in a football game, C-Rob, I would still be stunned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no precedent for it. Like, he would literally be setting a new standard, particularly athletically, to be able to step back on a football field. The reason why I think him getting caught making that comment matters is because it's real. Like, to me, I'm like, oh, this isn't just, him on a Tuesday talking to Pat McAfee saying this stuff. It's not him poking, fun at like science or this or that. No, this is like legitimately he is planning to come back and play football this season. I don't think he says that to Derwin unless it's really real in his mind. And when you talk about him walking it back, yeah, I mean, sort of. You talked about there being hoops. I mean, we hearing him say that, we would have all assumed, well, yeah, there's a lot of stuff he's still got to do before he could ever, get himself back on a football field. But it's, I think in his mind, to me, it's as tangible as it gets that he is planning to play football for the Jets before the end of the 2023 season, or at the very least, if they can make it into the playoffs, which I don't know at this point.
Okay, to serve the role I'm apparently supposed to serve on this podcast, I've got dictionary.com up for the word few. So Rodgers told Derwin James he planned to return in a few weeks. He told Pat McAfee he plans to return in a few fortnights being 2 weeks. So we're now doubling the timeline. According to dictionary.com, few means not many, but more than one, or it could be a special limited number, a small number or amount, small number of persons or things. So he does not think it will be a large number of weeks. We've also, though, from Monday to Tuesday, we doubled the timeline from a few being like 3 weeks to a few fortnights being 6 weeks. So we're well on our way to continuing to double and triple and continue to grow exponentially. I also think that that's great that I think Aaron Rodgers has to tell himself that he's coming back this season. Like there are a lot of guys, who like Daniel Jones talking
That's
today. And
point.
I remember Dak Prescott did something similar where it's like, you don't think about when you're coming back. You think about what steps you have left and how you're going to do the next step. I think Rodgers is motivated by saying like, I'm going to do this. And that's what's keeping my spirits up. That's what's keeping my motivation strong. That's when I'm doing like the 500th leg lift with the other leg. That's what's reminding me I need to do it. I also think that is not fully his decision. Like, yes, he might generally be able to do in his personal life what he wants. And he does a lot of things we don't see NFL players do, in the way he like has a show with Pat McAfee every week and makes $1 million for it every year. But the doctors and the coaches have to clear him. And if they don't clear him and they don't think it's in his best interest, they're not going to clear him. And the front office still has a vested interest in not like ruining their investment for next year.
Yeah, if it's not, look, if he feels like he's ready to go and there's not meaningful football to be played, if there's not really something on the line, Joe Douglas, the GM, Joe's gonna look at him and go, there's no way we're risking you. We need you to be. I suppose, and I think you spoke to this, there is a positive element that even if he doesn't make it, right, but he's really feeling like, okay, I'm going to try and get back for 2023. He should be there for the offseason. I mean, like if he gets close, it means he's going to be there for the passing program. He's going to be there for OTAs. He's going to be there working with all these players, which when he initially suffered it, first thing I thought was like, oh my God, like how much of the offseason program is he going to miss? All this chemistry is important. And at the very least, it looks like he will take part in all the meaningful stuff that happens for the Jets next offseason. So in a way, they've already won third place. They've already won something in this process, even if he doesn't come back this year.
Is there a fair point? Charles McDonald, C-Mac, said on the exempt list yesterday, why is he forcing this return too early if this isn't his last year in the NFL? If he's coming back next year, why rush it so much? I hear that, and I think that's a fine take by C-Mac. But the only thing that I keep thinking about is what Jori just said. And there's just not a part of the wiring of Aaron Rodgers that is going to sit there and say, see you next week. Like, that's just not, he lives so much in the present that I can't imagine him just simply saying, hey, I'm just going to take my time and make I do think the wiring matters in the analysis of why he's saying what he's saying.
And Fitz, let's not forget how happy he was before this happened, right? I mean, that was the whole story. Like, oh my God, he feels reborn. Like, hey, maybe there's a chance maybe he plays more than 2 years with the Jets. Maybe this goes longer than we think. And then that happens. He hits literally the depths of despair. I would want to get back to being that happy guy again, right? I would want to have that camaraderie of teammates leaning on me, knowing I can contribute again. But at the same time, someone's got to protect him from himself. And as much as I'm sure it would be great to go back and play more football than, 60 seconds, I don't know that it's something that should happen just to make him feel better if they're out of it.
All right. So the other thing I want to make sure we get in here, look, everybody on this show is a big fan of Charles Robinson's writing. There's never a doubt about that. In fact, before we started taping today, we were both telling him how talented he is. He didn't respond, but we still both told him how talented he is. I say that because there's an article out on Yahoo Sports right now, and I'm just reading the headline here because I think it makes a statement. As the Patriot Way dies out with McDaniels, Belichick, and Garroppolo, we see it was always the Brady way. I think it's an important distinction here because it feels like there's a meltdown happening in New England, C-Rob, and your article reminded us that meltdown becomes even harder to recreate what was there when the right people may not be in the building.
I know, look, we can go back over the Patriots' history. A lot of great defensive players. There were a lot of great, there's the surrounding talent at times. There were Hall of Famers, whatever, but no one was the common single thread of success for everybody the way that Tom Brady was. And I mean that for the coordinators who left and tried to, go become head coaches elsewhere, whether it was defensive or offensive. I mean it for Bill. I mean it for the players that Tom was, throwing to. I would contend that, Randy Moss's, to me, greatest season he ever had was with Tom Brady. And Randy Moss had a number of great seasons. Obviously, he's a Hall of Famer. But it was interesting to me on Sunday when you looked at it, you saw three people who all had this connective tissue to this idea of the Patriot Way, but really they all had this connective tissue to Tom. Jimmy spent 3 years. He supposedly was pushing Tom. Tom, started to feel uncomfortable about what Jimmy's status was going to be in the organization moving forward at the quarterback position. You had Josh's entire career viability was built on what he did with Tom Brady. And then you have Bill, who, 20 winning seasons with the Patriots, 18 of them were with Tom Brady as his starting quarterback. And as we see the Patriots basically collapse in on themselves, it was always about Tom. Like we tried so many ways to convince ourselves it was something else, and there was a shared quality. I get it. I understand that. I yield to the idea of it being a shared quality. But the point was, the one thing you couldn't take out of the shared quality and have the lasting success is Tom. And it was proven repeatedly by every single individual who either separated themselves from Tom by going and getting other jobs or got left behind when Tom left the organization. So there's no way we're going to look back. I go back to Shula. People can argue that every great quarterback or every great coach had a great quarterback during that era. Shula built his resume on, there were 6 quarterbacks he had winning seasons with. And at least 5 of them, if we toss out Scott Mitchell, 5 of them, they were like meaningful winning seasons. Like they were like, it wasn't like a surprise. It wasn't like he just patched something together and, oh, wow, it kind of happened. I think that matters when we look at Shula and we compare him to Bill Belichick in the longer view of history. And I would say that Don Shula, to me, proved I can do it with different quarterbacks. I can do it in different ways. And I don't know that Bill has proven that at all in New England.
I think there are 2 interesting points here because your main point is just generally when you talk about the culture, the way he wants to run an organization, that Brady was really, really key and really integral to making that work. But I think there's also the element of Belichick, the GM, and Belichick, the head coach, and how they're constantly in conflict, and that Belichick, the head coach, has done some incredible things defensively. He's come up with great defensive game plans, especially in the postseason, but he's also really whiffed on some roster spots. And I think that the way that Brady was constantly able to cover for what he was doing for a GM allowed him to then go and be the head coach that he wanted to be and was capable of being. And so I'm also curious, what would the Patriots dynasty have looked like if Belichick wasn't running everything? Because if he didn't have Brady and he didn't have the success with Brady, he wouldn't have been given carte blanche, you do whatever you want with personnel, I don't think. And so if you don't do that, then do you start having someone else being a checks and balances guy that maybe Bill Belichick needs? I
mean, you could argue that had the success come in a different way, maybe the organization wouldn't have been structured so singularly through Bill and everything flowed through Bill. But I mean, it happened the way that it happened. But as you said, with Tom, the thing that we probably underappreciated, that I think we saw mostly painted by people who went elsewhere was that if you're going to be a Patriot Way coach and you're going to structure it where all the power flows through the coach and it creates this sort of atmosphere of honestly distrust. Like, are we being heard as leaders in our locker room because this guy's acting like a dictator? He's putting all these things in place. Do we trust this guy? We underappreciated Tom Brady being the person in the locker room who's managing Bill, upward, and then he's managing the locker room downward. And players are looking at Tom and being like, man, Bill's giving Tom constantly. And Tom's basically another coach on the field, where I would say Tom had a level of expectations that could and probably did at times exceed Bill's in practice. Like, guys were afraid of Tom. And if you're afraid of Tom, you're not thinking about how afraid you are of Bill. Okay. And then you got Josh McDaniels, who goes to the Raiders, he goes to the Broncos, and he tries to do the Bill thing. And what happens? Jay Cutler and him get into it. Cutler's tossed out of town, he loses the locker room in a season and a half. He goes to the Raiders, and Carr's gone. And then he brings in Jimmy Garroppolo. And I think part of the design of bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo was because he thought, Jimmy's been through this. He went through it. We were there. He went through this for a few years. He knows how it works. And I'm going to have my quarterback now who will follow me and everyone will follow him. Except it didn't happen. They looked at Jimmy and they're like, he ain't it. And why we were close to Derek, and now we feel like we're not being heard. We don't have the quarterback who we really believed in as a leader. And this other guy keeps throwing picks, and you keep telling us that he's the best guy when he's not. And there's a lot of Tom that, as much as he was appreciated and maybe overappreciated in some respects, I still think his ability to eat from Belichick was a vastly underrated skill and ability.
But I'll give Belichick credit here. Going back to The Man in the Arena, I don't know if you guys ever watched it on ESPN. They did the whole series. And at the time, I was hosting this after show with different people involved in it. And I think when you look at Belichick, the decision to start Brady and keep Brady in that seat after they had paid Bledsoe took a lot of guts for a coach. It did to ship out a quarterback. So I want to give him his flowers that. But the thing that really blew my mind in the first couple of the episodes of that Man in the Arena series was players talking about Brady and his development years in the beginning, where, a player would come up to him and say, hey, man, you're partying too hard. You got to stop. And he's like, okay. Another player came up to him, I think it was Willie McGinnis, that came up to him and said, you're not eating right. You're not taking care of yourself. So he invests in TB12. Like he was too hyped up before the Super Bowl. One of the guys walked up to him, threw him up against the wall, according to that special, and said, hey, I don't need you to be something bigger. I need you to be just who you've been all year. Just be yourself. And I use those three examples because here's somebody that's ascending to tremendous heights. And instead of taking those as a, how would you challenge me? Tom Brady seemed to take every single one of them as, here's how I make myself better. And because he did that, because he absorbed all of this feedback from veteran players about how to improve who he was, I think he really becomes the unicorn. So we call it the Patriot Way. We talk about Belichick and all of these things, but I think the real unicorn here is the Brady Way, because it's rare to find somebody that's constantly reinvesting all of that energy into themselves to figure out how to be great. Like, as a Raiders fan, I would love to hate Tom Brady. I cannot hate Tom Brady because fact is, all he ever did in his career was take the things that he needed from everybody to figure out how to make himself superhuman. And that, to me, really becomes the defining part of the Patriot with that. Like, that's the thing most guys that walk in that locker room didn't have, don't have, and won't have moving forward. That's the thing that a coach can't get another person to replicate that. So him being gone absolutely kills that flame for them in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, the ultimate ability to delegate power, even for a guy like Bill Belichick, for a Nick Saban, for, the ones that we look at these like intimidating figures who have created monstrous resumes, is when you find someone who is basically you. Like, you find a guy who's as single-minded as you, who wants guys to be as perfect as you want them to be perfect. That's what he had in the second half of Brady's career in New England. And that's how people divide the Super Bowls. The first three were largely on Bill because it was a very defensive predicated team. Bill, designed a lot of these things that led to the success. And then the last three were Tom's, because Tom came into his own. He emerged as this leader. He was Bill under Bill. And, it's an interesting career that I think we're going to continue to to unfold for a lot of years. And I didn't know this. There's like another documentary that apparently Brady's not involved in that is going to come out on Brady's career. So
on a much lighter and less serious note about Brady, did you guys see the picture that he posted of him and Wemby today? And he was like, awesome to meet you, Wemby, incredible young man, blah, blah, blah. And then he basically just like his head goes up to Wemby's shoulder and he tags Edelman and goes, P.S. at Edelman11, is this how you felt all those years? And Edelman just responds with like the Office gif, like, I'm dead inside. Then Brady follows up, and I put it in our Zoom group chat, with a Photoshop picture where he's the same height as Wemby, and with the caption, media outlets asking for permission to use his photos. Yes, you may. Here's the file. Disregard other Photoshopped images of me and Victor, as if like the real one was him being the same height, and I'm just losing it.
Now I want to see Wemby, Brady, and then Edelman all in a line.
It is amazing that towering individuals next to Victor Wembanyama look absolutely tiny. Like it is just seeing him against other NBA players. It is not fair. I mean, so kudos to Brady, by the way, for embracing that. And a great article. Be sure to go out to Yahoo Sports. Check it out there. C-Rob always does great writing. This was some of my favorite you've done in a minute. Like it was, this was really well.
So cogent, like so clearly thought through, like the way you laid out your arguments, the way you supported it, the way you wrote it. Yeah. Really
yeah. It's interesting to me when you can read something. Was it Brady or Belichick is such a hot topic for, dumb TV shows, to read something that's really well done on it that actually answers a lot of those questions in efficient ways. I found it to be impressive. We're back tomorrow with Zero Blitz. You can follow all of us on social media at Charles Robinson, at Jori Epstein. I'm at Jason Fitz. Stone is our producer doing God's work behind the glass at SJ Rochelle. Be sure to give him a follow out there. And C-Rob, tell everybody how we can support Terez Paylor's legacy.
Yeah, as always, if you could, check out breakingtea.com/Terez. That's capital T and Breaking Tea for the All Juice Tea and Hoodie. Remember that proceeds from that purchase go to support the Terez Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can also contribute to that directly, as well as scholarship in his name at Missouri if you check out the podcast description.
Also, be sure while you're checking out the description to leave us a 5-star review, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, and enemies, everybody, to hang out with us every single week. Also, start hitting us with movie and book suggestions, because we're gonna get learned around here on this show.
And like manners suggestions for C-Rob. I
think it should just be absolutely outrageous tweets that do not deserve kindness, that forces his skin to crawl, so we can just watch him be like, oh. I mean,
one of my friends hit me up and he's like, why are you fighting with, he's like, you went to Michigan State. Why are you fighting with Michigan State fans? He's like, you're supposed to be fighting with like Michigan fans and Ohio State fans. He was like, you're fighting with your own people. He's like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, I can't help it. I just think it's just a people thing. It's a fan thing. I don't know what it is.
It's the fire in your belly, and that's what we love. That's what everybody loves. We're back next Wednesday with more inside coverage. Thanks for hanging out with us, y'all.